little sip of tea and we'll get into this thing.
Let's do it.
Sweet, we're recording. Sweet. Welcome to Good Humans Podcast. Candice Mama, how you going, Candice?
Oh my gosh, Coop, I'm so excited to be doing this. Since we last met, I've been so excited. I'm like, I've got to hook up with Coops. Like, I've got to get this done. No.
Oh, you're the best. We met at Humankind. It probably would have been a month ago now.
Yeah.
About a month ago. You spoke at the event. You're the co-CEO of Aime, the charity which the event was raising money for.
Yeah.
We had a great time. We didn't really get to meet that much at the event, but then at the after party, our good friend Herman, who threw the event, John Winning, who's been a guest on this podcast as well. Yeah. We had an after party and we got to connect and had such a good time. And you were like, I'll come on the podcast. And we tried to do it the next day, but I didn't have a hangover, but I don't think you might have had a little hangover. Did you drink?
I mean, I do drink, but I didn't have a hangover.
Yeah. It was just a late night.
We left
late.
I wanted to say it was definitely, I think, the duration of
the week.
Especially because, John's got the special way of creating an atmosphere. So I don't think any of us knew what time it was. When we left, we were like, whoa, so much sunshine.
Yeah, seriously. But that was really good fun. But we spoke there and we're like, we've got to do this podcast. And we tried to do it the next day. Yeah. Didn't work. You flew back to South Africa. But here you are in the beautiful Byron Bay for a little event and you're like, hey, I'm close. Can you get down here? And I was like, absolutely, I can to come and chat to you. So good to see you again.
Thank you for having me, really. I've seen some of the episodes and I'm such a fan of your work. So I'm happy to be here.
No, I can't wait to get to know your story because Herman did mention it briefly and I didn't really get to see too much of you at Humankind. So this is a great chance to get to know you a bit better. So the first question I do open Good Humans podcast with is very similar for everyone. Yeah. What are you grateful for right now?
Wow, I mean, I'm in Byron Bay at the moment, there's so much to be grateful for. I'm grateful to be doing what I love. I'm grateful to be in Australia, and I'm grateful for life, genuinely grateful for life. And it's not something I could always say. So it's beautiful that I get to say that now.
It's nice to be able to reflect on that. And I'm very excited to get to know your story because you click on your Instagram. I told you this before. I didn't do too much research because I know your story. Probably the more research I did, the more lost I would get in the depth of your story. It seems like you look on your Instagram and there's all these different most influential women in the world from different organizations. So let's get to know why the hell you're so influential.
Goodness, Cooper, if you can tell me this, then you know what, you're becoming my bestie. No, it's really, I think in life, we have so many choices that we get to make, right? Whereby we have these detours that we face, and I'm no different in that way. I experienced a lot of challenges growing up. So what ended up happening was I grew up in South Africa, Johannesburg, right? And apartheid was a very massive factor in almost every South African's life. So in some ways, I feel like my story is reflective of the country's history. So what happened to me was when I was 9 months old, unfortunately, my father was brutally murdered by an apartheid assassin.
Can you explain real quickly apartheid?
Please,
I've spoken to Tom Carroll, actually, the pro surfer. I've got to send you the link because he spoke to Nelson Mandela and boycotted going to the events in South Africa in support of being against apartheid. But do you want to explain that? Sorry to cut your story off, but I think it'll give context because I don't think a lot of people would fully understand what the apartheid was.
Absolutely, and thank you for giving me that opportunity. So apartheid, as it's seen by the world in many ways, and how history started to tell the story, is simply a system of division. So how people understand it is, white people lived here, black people lived here, right? Very much like slavery in America. However, what people don't understand, and this is how I define apartheid, it was a war. And it was a war that attacked every part of society. So it was a financial war. It was a property and land war. It was a human war. And it was such a dehumanizing system that during that period, what would happen is the minority had control of the majority in the country. So the only way to do that is by firstly building land in a way that segregates completely. So Black people, colored people, Indian people were all based in different places and they were ranked according to their race, Black being the lowest you could be. And so people would have to carry a card if they were domestic workers or if they had to enter wide areas, and it was called a dom pass. And so if you translate that from Afrikaans, it's like a dummy pass. So you had to carry this as a Black person, and if you were seen in any place Without that card, you would get beaten and you'd go to prison. And so it became very violent towards, I'd say, probably between 1985 onwards into 1993. 1994 was, when Nelson Mandela was released, our new elections, and he stepped into power. But what happened is there were all these political parties, the ANC, which was Nelson Mandela, the Pan-African Congress, which was much more of the fighter party, and then there were obviously the opposing governments. And so they fought for our freedom. They fought, people like really put their lives on the line to say, I want to be seen as human and I deserve to be seen as human. And 1994, the transition happened from this oppressive system into what we live in now. And what I do have to give South Africa credit for is we are one of a kind in the world. We're one of the only countries in the world that has transitioned so peacefully without a revolution. So it was a pretty intense time.
Yeah, wow. So what year were you born?
I was born in 1991.
Okay.
Yeah.
The same age as my older sister. I'm 1994. So
yes.
Born and your father was murdered. Let's pick up the story from there, because obviously it comes with a lot of challenges through those last couple of years before the apartheid was transitioned. What was your childhood like? What can you remember?
Yeah, so I mean, my father was killed in 1992, and my father was an activist. So he was a very skilled driver. He was the right-hand man to the leader of the PAC, which is the Pan-African Congress. And what happened was Eugene de Kock's team set up an ambush for my father. And how it was reported was that terrorists were shot in a shootout because my father was referred to as a terrorist. And when you're a terrorist, your family doesn't have the right to know how you were killed. They just know you were killed. And when my mom found this out, she had to go identify his body. And because of the brutality of the way he was killed, he was actually, all she could see was a piece of red fabric on his skin because he was burnt alive. And the ring, his wedding band had burst. So she saw a sliver of the wedding ring. And that's the only way she could identify him. And I think an important part to note is my dad was also only 25. I am now 31. And so I feel like I lived so much of my life in homage to him for the life he didn't get to experience. But in childhood, how that really manifested for me was I didn't really have any context, to be honest, from like coming into consciousness until around the age of 9. My childhood was very different because I had to go live with my great-grandmother, and I only met my mom when I was like around 5, 6. But then when I finally came into the family fold, met my mother, started living with her, what happened was I realized the families around me didn't look like mine. So I was like, wait, there's a mother, a son, and me. Where's the rest of this accompaniment? And what ended up happening was my mom bought a book. It was called Into the Heart of Darkness by Jacques Poe. And in this book, I remember my mom saying, like, she pointed at a picture on the book and she pointed at the man who murdered my father. And she said, this is the man who killed your father. And at 9, I was like, okay. And I had so many questions. But what was more intriguing to me, what is in this book? And I remember one day getting this opportunity to actually see inside the book because I'd been eavesdropping and I was hearing people crying and screaming. And I was like, I need to know what's in this book. And I heard the page number. And so one day my mom left and I ran to the room and I opened it. And Cooper, what I saw was a picture of my dad's burnt body, clutching a steering wheel, and his eyes were protruding. And it was etched into my brain. Like I couldn't shift it. Yeah. And from the age of 9 until around 16, I was highly anxious. I was depressed. And I channeled that into sports. So I became a really great athlete at that point. But one night I remember just feeling like I was having a heart attack. I was like, oh my gosh. And I went to my mom's room. She rushed me to the hospital. And when we got to the hospital, they kept me overnight. The following day, the doctor sat my mom and I down and he said, in my over 20 years of experience, I've never seen stress symptoms so severe in someone your age. Then he followed with the words, your body's killing you. And if you don't change what you're doing, you're going to die. And Cooper, to be honest with you, at that point, that felt like a dream. I was like, oh my goodness, please let this end. I can't do this. And one day, a few weeks later, I remember walking from like training and I had this thought. And the thought was, Eugene de Kock killed your father. And now you're letting him kill you too. And that became the complete shift in my life. And I was determined to survive at that point.
Wow. I don't even know how to respond to that. Like your childhood is something. I've had some guests recently. I've had some difficult upbringings, and you've by far just outweighed everyone. It's just, I feel so much for you, your family, and yeah, it's so special. Obviously now the work you're doing to try and really bring difference to the world and make change in the world. And I'm sure your dad would be so proud of what you are doing now. Going through high school, what was school like for you? Is school something that you got to do? I know, yeah. What was school like, especially through this time when you're obviously experiencing these stress symptoms? Your body is killing itself, so the doctor says. Yeah, what was school like, and then what happened once you did have that mindset shift? What did that look like?
I mean, that's a great question. What was school like? To be honest, my schooling was pretty normal.
Okay.
Like, I was a very private child, so I never really shared about my family. People perceived us in one way, and I never corrected them, because the one emotion I've always known I've hated was pity. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I don't want people to give me anything because they felt sorry. I wanted to earn my way in life. And so people never knew. Like, people only found out about my story, including my teachers, when I had actually met my father's killer when I was 24, and it became worldwide news. And I remember it was so funny because people were just contacting me. They were like, yo, wait, what? Like, your dad is dead. Like, what? Like, how is this even possible? This makes no sense. How did you keep this from us?
Yeah, because that's scary. Yeah. I'm guessing you're about to say I didn't tell anyone until 24, and that must be such a hard secret to keep. And because you didn't want the pity, like, not that shame, that it's just like, I can't imagine the emotions that must be felt to have to hide something like that.
Yeah, you know what? It was so much more about just self-protection. I didn't want to tell anyone because then I knew I'd have to explain. And so because I didn't have a lot of the facts, even though I started researching very early on about my father's killer, who he was, how he did, what happened, it was very much my thing. And I don't come from a family. I mean, a lot of people, I think, have experienced this where we're super open with emotion. So you kind of suck it up and move forward. Like, no one's stopping for you. This bus is moving. Like, you're going to just suck it up. And I think that sucking it up is actually what led to my depression, because it wasn't just in that part of my life that I was sucking it up. I was sucking up everything, any pain, any kind of emotion that was perceivably not positive was something that needed to be, discarded and just shoved down. And so that really became the way I lived.
Wow. So school, what did you, while going through school, think your life was going to look like post-school? Did you have any visions for vocation, what you were going to do for work? Where were you good? Were you smart at school? Do you want to go to university? Yeah, talk me through the last few years of school where you thought life was going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I was smiling about it because I haven't thought about it in so long. And yeah, I always knew I was a storyteller. So that I always had. I always knew I wanted to make an impact in people's lives. That I always had. The way I'm doing it now, I could have never pictured in a million years. And really what I wanted to do was be a war correspondent, because I realized in South Africa, we've got 11 official languages, which comes with its own accent, its own background, its own culture. And what I realized very early on was that the people who articulated and spoke, as they say, well, were the ones that were taken seriously. And those who spoke with an accent. It's not like, the world is in love with a French and Spanish accent, but when it's a South African accent, especially in South Africa, people see you as illiterate. And I realized that people weren't being taken seriously and their plights weren't being taken seriously. And I realized this around the world, that how people tell their story defines if there's going to be aid, if people are going to be helped, if their stories will reach anyone. And so I wanted to become a CNN war correspondent and cover other people's stories. So I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I knew I wanted to make an impact on humanity in some way. The way it's transpired, not so much. Not so much the same in the way that I thought I'd do it, but very much the same in its DNA.
Yeah, wow. I'm so excited to hear your journey through your 20s, because that upbringing obviously builds such a strong why. And it seems like until 24, a very hidden why almost. What did it look like when you finished school? How old were you? What was that next period? Let's say like 18 to when you meet your father's killer, and how that, we'll catch up to that. What was that next period after school up until that and what led you to wanting to meet him, and how'd that come about?
Yeah. So between 18 and 24, my family experienced heavy financial burdens. And so I knew that I wasn't going to get into university if I didn't get like a scholarship or something. However, I also knew that my family needed money. And so I needed to prioritize what was going to be the most important. And to me, my family's well-being was more important. And so I decided to go into the workforce. So I was doing promotions, I was doing, modeling, I was just anything that was going to give me money, I was just out there hustling. And, thankfully, I was making a decent living. I was helping my mom, I was helping the family. So I really thought about school and studying for like, okay, I'll do it when I get to this point, when my family gets it together, And so I started enrolling for a journalism program that I could study from home around the age of 23. Which was ironic because as soon as I enrolled, kind of my life completely changed by then meeting my dad's killer. And how that came about was my mom had gotten a call from the National Prosecuting Authority, and they were doing these programs called Victim Perpetrator Dialogues. And apparently they couldn't find my mom for like 5 years, which is ironic because my mom is like on Facebook all the time. I was like, you didn't look on Facebook? But they finally reached her. And I remember coming home one day from the gym and she said, I just got a call from the National Prosecuting Authority and they want to know if we'd like to meet Eugene. And Cooper, I remember taking a beat.
Was he in prison or anything?
He was in prison, yes.
For war crimes or for...
because apartheid wasn't considered a war, it wouldn't have been called a war crime, but he was in prison for 212 years on 89 charges of murder. Yeah. So, I mean, I took a beat, but I said yes immediately because there was, that inner niggling that just knows if you don't do something, you're going to regret it forever. And I had that in that moment. And I said to my mom, I'm going. And she was like, if you guys don't go, I don't want to go. And I said, I don't know who else is coming, but I'm going. Yeah. So that's really how it led up to that point.
Wow. Yeah. I'm just trying to like piece it all together, how that comes about in your head. Did you, when you thought you're going to see him, was it from a point of potential forgiveness? Was it a point of fuck you? Was it from a point? I'm just like, I can't imagine like how hard that would be mentally to get that call. And then and then I'm just trying to like wrap my head around, so this guy was head of a party, or was he kind of an enforcer for a political party that was trying to uphold the apartheid movement?
I love that question. So basically with Eugene, he was the head of the police force.
Okay.
So he was one of the highest ranked police officials. He reported directly to the president at that time. And at we'll get to this point, the one that I want to make, but really he wasn't some rogue agent just killing Black people for fun, and I think that is a very important thing to note. Yeah, well, know what, there was a structure that he was following. And I think that's the complexity about apartheid. It was so integrated into our DNA, whether that be psychologically for the people of color, or it was, from a structural perspective for white South Africans. But it was such a well-structured machine, from an engineering standpoint. Like, I marvel at how they managed to do it.
Wow. So they're doing that for years. It's come to, obviously by this time, by your late 20s, been abolished. They've put a lot of people in prison who were withholding the cruel movement, which it was. So you get that call, you decide, you know what, no, I'm going to go face him. What was going through your head? What did that look like? Where did the meetup happen? Yeah.
So, I mean, from that moment, I said yes. And you did ask a question actually, and you said, was it like from a place of forgiveness or like a fuck you? And the truth is, Cooper, I can't tell you. I knew for sure that something was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to be forgiveness, if I'm being dead honest. I felt like I'd gotten to a point in my life where I was just solid enough within myself to be able to do it. That was really what it was. And so when the day came, my whole family decided to go. So it was my grandfather, my mother, my 2 brothers, and myself. And we headed to the prison. So it's South Africa's biggest maximum security prison. And we got there, and that's where I had anticipation. I was like, okay, it's going to be a prison. It's going to be silver, like cold cold, But no, it wasn't. They led us to the prison, but they took us to the room where the guards have their dinner and lunches. And Cooper, it was actually a little eerie because it felt like visiting an old relative. It was like decorated very much like your grandma's house would be decorated.
So
And
he wasn't in some dodgy prison. He
yeah,
was in the nice
so
part of the prison.
weird. And it had like tea and scones. I'm like, I guess we're
This is
having
weird.
scones.
Wow.
So that I think was the first jarring moment for me. But after that, we sat down and we just kind of sat in formation. I started the long end of the table. And then it was my younger brother, my older brother, my grandfather, and then my mother ended this long side. And then it was two wardens of the prison, and then the chief of the prison, I believe, other wardens. And then next to me was the priest on the shorter side, and next to him was an empty chair for Eugene. And so they just said to us, Eugene will be in at any moment, please, just when he gets in, we'll start. So we're talking amongst ourselves. And I think I turned around first, and Cooper, as if by like magic, the man was there. I didn't hear the chains. He was chained up. So I was like, how did I not see anything, this man? He just appeared, and he's a massive man. And I was just shocked. And the priest looked at us and he was like, okay, let's get started. And he introduced everyone, starting with my mom. And he said, that's Sandra Mama, widow of the deceased Glenik Masilo Mama. And Cooper, he leaned forward and he said, pleasure to meet you. And he leaned back. And with each and every one of us, he would lean forward and say, pleasure to meet you. And those are strange words, coming from, especially in that environment. And so my mom started with a line of questioning. She said, what happened to my husband? And so Eugene explained to us that they had sent an askari into my father's camp. So an askari is someone who's a turncoat. They're working for both sides of the government. And this man won over my father's trust. And he said to my dad, because my dad was so skilled at driving and he was actually quite a good shooter. And so people were like, oh, he can keep himself safe and get people into the country who are going to help us, And so they said, oh, no, just need you to go get some guys across the border and then drive them back. This was supposed to be 3 hours, 4 hours max. So my father drove with two other gentlemen in the car, including the askari. As they were nearing the bridge, the Snellspruit Bridge, it was like an hour and a half away from where my dad was staying. Eugene de Kock was actually at the top of the bridge, and he had set up 4 men on either side of the bridge. So about 2 minutes away, the askari said, oh, I actually need to get out, but I'll meet you guys further ahead. And so he jumps out. My dad keeps on driving, and the 8 men start firing at my father's minibus. Eugene from the top of the bridge realized that it wasn't coming to a stop. So he ran down the bridge and he emptied out his magazine cartridge on my dad. When the car stopped and he still saw signs of life in the vehicle, he doused them all in fuel and he set them alight. So it was the first time we took in that much information in detail. And Cooper, it felt like someone had kicked me in the stomach, to be quite honest. And so the encounter continued. We spoke a little bit, to each other. And at the end, my mom said, Eugene, I forgive you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then my grandfather said it. My 2 brothers said it. And then it got to me. And that whole encounter, I couldn't say anything. And I said, hi, Eugene. And he looked at me and he said, hi. And I said, I want to say I forgive you. But before I do, I need to ask you one question. And he looks at me and he goes, anything, what's that? And I say, I want to know, do you forgive yourself? And he looked at me, and for the first time, because he's very stoic, he lost his composure and he said, every time people come here, that's one question I hope they never ask me. And he looked away and he wiped the side of his eye because a tear had come down. And he looked back at me and said, when you've done the things I've done, how do you forgive yourself? And Cooper, I started to sob. I just started crying and crying. And what surprised me in that moment was that I wasn't crying for myself. I was crying for this human being sitting in front of me. And I realized there was nothing I could do to take away his pain, and there was nothing he could do to take away mine. And so we ended the meeting, and I walked to him first because I was the closest. And I said to him, would you mind if I gave you a hug? And again, he looked at me confused. And he got up and he held me really tightly and he said, I am so sorry for what I've done. And your father would have been so proud of the woman you've become. And in that moment, it wasn't lost on me that the same hands that were used to take away my dad were also the same hands that were used to comfort me. And so I left the prison and I decided to advocate for his parole. And a few months later, he received it because he wasn't eligible for parole. And that's really how the world ended up knowing about me and my story.
I'm like so grateful that you have the strength to share that and articulate in the way you do. I'm sure your 16-year-old self who realized that to articulate your story is one of the best ways to be able to tell a story and actually make impact, and you do it unbelievably well.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think where I want to go with this next part of questioning, because there's so many places. Because what you mentioned when you got sick, when you were in your late teens, by saying, you said before that the man who killed your dad was also killing you in a different way. Do you think by getting to see him and getting to do that, that was a way for you to kind of move forward and being able to apologize for him? So let's talk about that. So you say you advocated for his parole. I'm like so bad with prison system and stuff. Does parole means he can get out of prison? But if he's killed 80 people, surely it's
89.
that many life sentences. So you'd never be able to get out.
Yeah.
Yes? Or,
So it's actually very interesting. There's a number
served at once.
Yes.
Okay.
So, well, technically, there's so many complex parts of this because I think a lot of people are asking themselves, they're like, we love the fact that you forgave. That's great. Yeah. But there were also 88 other people that were murdered, right? And that wasn't lost on me when I advocated for his parole. And for me, it was unjust. And the reason it was unjust was, and I'd written an open letter in my advocacy. And in this open letter, I stated that the current party that runs South Africa is called the African National Congress, the one Nelson Mandela was elected under. And a part of the party's, referendum or constitution is that the enemy is only the person who continues to support the previous system. And we cannot hold people to account for the sins they committed in their past under a different regime. And so I pointed that out. But then another parallel that I thought was so vital was Eugene de Kock was not a manic killer on the loose. Yeah. He operated for a system. And the man who gave him his commands received the Nobel Peace Prize. The man who pulled the trigger on his behalf received life imprisonment. And to me, that did not seem just. And so I think that in and of itself, drawing on those parallels, is exactly what ended up getting him released. Because I think so many people kind of saw it from a different perspective and said, hey, are we going to punish soldiers that went to war? We don't do that. We don't arrest soldiers when they come back from war for the crimes they committed in war.
What he was doing is disgusting as it was. Yeah, the way that you can have that perspective and that empathy is maybe the deepest empathy I've ever heard. And I'm sure that's why your story became such a big story, is because of that empathy that most people can't relate to. Let's talk about that next chapter when you do advocate. What does that look like to get his release? What sort of media attention did that draw? And what was this next period like once this happened? You're starting to study journalism. Yeah. Dare I say your career probably skyrocketed very quickly. What was that next period of your life like? Because I'm sure it came with a lot of contempt as well from people, especially the 88 other families.
Yeah, I mean, my life became a complete storm. As soon as the police minister had announced that Eugene was released, my name was completely intertwined with that. And it was so interesting because I was like, okay, I guess this is how when people Google me for the rest of eternity, this is who I'm going to be linked with, But I have no regrets about that. I think that for me, there was so much conviction that I had in what I did. And there's also a care and concern I hold for Eugene. I feel very responsible. I feel as though if he went out and decided to commit atrocities, it falls on my shoulders. I'm responsible. And so I took it with a lot of responsibility. Yeah. I didn't do it lightly.
Big thing to do at 24, 25 too.
Yeah. And for me, it came with, it was a very mixed bag. I got a lot of death threats. I received so much hatred. But the hatred I received wouldn't have been from the people you thought. The people you think are the people that were direct victims to him. Those are the people. Those people, ironically, didn't really say anything. And the families that did reach out were very understanding. And they said, you know what? It is what it is. We lived in a terrible time. Whereas the people who were never impacted, never knew him on a personal level, they were outraged. And so
It's
I
probably
was,
all the ones that felt guilt because they were the ones who somewhat supported the movement back then. You know what I mean? They're the ones who,
it's
him
actually,
going to prison felt like a bit of soothing for their soul.
ironically, Cooper, it wasn't actually, I didn't experience a lot of hatred from white people. I experienced a lot of support and outpouring of understanding. They were like, wow, I felt so guilty for so long. And just hearing you, it makes me feel so much lighter. Thank you.
Wow.
And so I didn't get a lot of hatred. I actually got a lot more black hate. People were very angry at me, and I was called a sellout. People assumed I got paid for it. Like, there was a whole bunch of theories, lots of death threats, lots of, the R word threats. And my family was really fearful for me for a period of time. And they were like, maybe you should withdraw. And I remember just saying to my mom one day, like, if this is where my time on earth ends, I am not doing it on my knees. I said what I said and I stand by it. So that really shifted that, but that started to wear off. But what didn't wear off was around the world, I think for 2.5 weeks, I was on the news somewhere. Like, I'm speaking about China, I'm speaking about New York, like everywhere in the world, I was on the news. And in the last couple of interviews, you can hear my voice is gone. I'm just like croaking it through. And it was so interesting because I just remember thinking, okay, I know how the media works. I'm going to be on the news cycle, then I'm going to be forgotten. That's just how it's going to be. And I was okay with that. And then one of the vice chancellors of one of our prominent universities, Professor Jonathan Jansen, he said to me, Candice, hey, please, could you just do one keynote and get this over with? Then you're done. And I remember being like, oh, cool, And I did this keynote, Cooper, and it changed my life because when it got to Q&A, I remember person after person, to this day, I still get chills. The first person stood up and they said, this is not a question, but when I was 5 years old, this happened to me and I've never told anyone. Thank you for sharing and giving me power to share. And it just started rolling. And people were sharing some of the most traumatic things in a room of like 100 people. And I just started sobbing. And in my soul, in that moment, I said, this is what I have to do. And so that's really how the journey began. And I became a speaker, writer, and how I got here right now.
Wow. See, I'm glad I feel like I should have researched more, but I'm glad I didn't, because you said if I typed in your name on Google, I would have obviously found all of this. So I'm glad that I got to do that rather than open with you're so influential because you did this. I'm glad that it built up to it without just throwing it down your face. I'm so grateful that you've shared all this build up of your story. So you do a keynote. Your keynote, is it around like forgiveness and around your story, kind of like what we've spoken about?
Pretty much. It was just telling the story. It wasn't even what I'd consider a keynote at that point. I was just like, there's no start, middle, or end. This is just the story. There's no key takeaways. I'm not going to be like, forgive. Like, I'm just like, so this is it, guys. So it wasn't really a keynote at that point. It's developed into one. But at that time, it was just an open sharing. And I felt so much responsibility because I realized the privilege I had to share a story that so many people experienced but were not heard. And the fact that I had the opportunity platform to not speak for myself. Every time I do a keynote, I speak first for my father and then I speak next for my people. So I feel like it is definitely an opportunity for people to have a deeper understanding of what people went through in my country.
Well, yeah, and it's so important to hear these stories and understand, like, this isn't like ancient history. This isn't even modern history. This is like 20 years ago. Like, this is so recent that it's important that we do understand. And there's still, like, I can imagine, I actually had this is going slightly off topic. I have this girl on episode 101 who works for this company, Project Rescue Children, and like their child trafficking and stuff like that. Like, there's so much stuff that goes on in the world that, me sitting here in Australia is so sheltered to. And like, I've been to South Africa quite a few times and I've seen that even still the segregation and the judgment and the way that white people do treat people who are black in Africa still to this day. So like, the impact that your words, your movement and your actions have I'm sure have had on so many is just profound, and you should be so proud. I'm sure your dad would be as well.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this next chapter, 25 to 30, where where have you been speaking? And what's the main message that you are trying to get across? What does forgiveness mean to you now?
I think it's so important to realize, and for me, forgiveness is an element of my story. But what I've learned is it's really how we tell our stories, Cooper. Each and every person listening to this is not going to experience the things I experienced. But I think the first and most important thing is to realize that none of us are in the Pain Olympics. The fact that my arm is cut off and you having internal organ failure, I'm not in less pain because I know you are suffering more than I am. We are probably in equal amounts of pain right now, and me saying like, I'm not going to feel this pain because you're going through more pain is like saying, I'm not going to, eat the sandwich because you are like, you are hungry on the other side of the world. Like me eating a sandwich is not going to impact you. Me not eating a sandwich is not going to impact you. And so I think it's first and foremost the most important thing. And then the next thing that I hope people take away from any talk that I do is you are the victor of your story. You're not the victim to it. And when we live our lives re-traumatizing ourselves, that's really when we tell ourselves our stories over and over, because when it happens, that's the first point of impact. But when you relive it, you're re-traumatizing yourself again and again and again. And it's so important for us to realize that this happened to me, but it's not who I am. And the fact that I'm still standing, still moving, still doing, still being kind, still doing all these things in the world means I'm a victor. I can stand with my head held high and be like, that thing was supposed to break me and it didn't. And if that couldn't break me, nothing will. I am built to do hard things and I keep doing hard things. And that is a victor's mentality. And so for me, outside of everything, it is about acknowledging you. We don't do that enough. We don't give ourselves enough credit. We don't stand on what we've overcome enough. And that is what I hope people take away. And so the last 5 years has really been around that. I do a lot of keynotes around the world. I've done like New York University, Columbia. I've done, so many different organizations around the world. Snapchat that we here for in Byron Bay. And for me, it's never just about saying forgive. I think the story speaks for itself. You choose to forgive, you choose to do it. But it is about, do you see yourself? Do you congratulate yourself? Are you aware of how far you've come? Are you kind to yourself? Because if you cannot give yourself all these things, it's going to be so hard for you to give it to others. And you will have limited capacity in how you give it to others. And so for me, it's just write your own story, man. Like take the pen. You are writing the script of your story every day. And is it going to be from a victim's mentality of bad things always happen to me? I'm always in this. If that's what you're telling yourself, you're probably going to be in that for a while. But if you just choose to say, look, today I just want to get 1% better. I just want to get just a little bit, just move forward a little bit and realize that you have infinite opportunity in front of you. And life is incredibly finite. So just do you and be good to you and everything else will change.
Oh, I love everything you just said. And you would have been laughing because I spoke to you before we started and I told you about my keynote. I talk about the hero and the victim and here we go. I've never heard of the victor and the victim. That's great. And I think and I like as well how this just came to me while you were saying that, this idea of like you can be the victor or the victim. And it's about these 1%ers. It's like every day we can be the victor or the victim. Do you go to bed tonight? Were you the victor or the victim today? What ran your thoughts more often than not? Was it I'm the victim, or did you do those little things that brought you ahead towards your goal, more in the direction towards that internal compass of our values and our morals and our real beliefs, where we truly want to be? That's one thing. And the second thing that you said, once again, is very in line with what I've been talking about a lot recently, this idea of being proud of what you do. And I like that you brought that up because I saw a therapist for the first time about 3 or 4 weeks ago now.
Amazing.
Just because I wanted to go through a few things. And the thing that we unlocked was the fact that I'm big on gratitude, always grateful. I'm always looking and being appreciative. But he said to me, it's amazing when the work, because I just felt like I'm a bit disconnected a little bit with the work I'm doing. I'm doing so much, like you said to me before, like, so cool you're doing all this stuff. But I just felt this like slight disconnect with, I don't know, it was a bit weird. And the psychologist said to me, he's like, it sounds like you're so grateful, but are you really proud of what you're doing? And that was the time where I sat there and went, sitting and being grateful, I feel like is like a 5-minute thing, but sitting and being proud is like an embodied thing. Like, yeah, you know what, I'm pretty proud of the stuff I've done. And it takes that introspection to actually feel that, rather than it just be like, oh yeah, I'm grateful. It's like,
Yeah.
am I proud? But yeah, it relates so much to both of those angles that you were talking about then.
I love that. And, I think it's so important, Cooper, to realize that we're constantly in this race with ourselves, right? We constantly feel like we should be somewhere other than where we are. And regardless of how much you do in the world, you always think, I could have done more. I should be here. I should be there. And I think what it really does when you are proud of where you're moving, you're like, hey, like I'm getting better. I'm making the world a better place in my way, in my corner of the world where I am. And that to people is different. Someone is making the world a better place by being a great mother right now. Someone else is making the world a greater place by, creating the next big technological revolution. And I don't think either one of those should be minimized based on, oh, this person's going to impact billions and this one's going to impact one life. Because it's so important to realize that all these social media platforms are not reality. Not everyone wants a mega yacht. Some people just want to be happy on a farm,
Yeah.
And it's okay for us to get those moments where we're like, man, everything's going right, but I'm not feeling good. And the fact that you could go to therapy and I go to therapy every week, it's so important. It's such a reflective space because what it does is it's a non-judgmental person giving you perspective on you in a way that you could never do, and those you love you couldn't do, because there's always a vested interest, right? So
that's like the psych said to me, is like going to a psychologist, it's speaking to your friends and your internal group is like trying to read the outside of a jar, but you're all locked inside the jar. It's like you can't read the label on the outside from inside the jar. And I was like, oh, that's a good one. You like that one? Good,
I love that. That's
the people
brilliant.
in your jar can't read the label. That's
I
like
love
from the outside
that.
you get that perspective.
Oh, beautiful.
And I love that you said the idea of we can't change. This is, once again, you're hitting all my nails on the head. So my new merch collection, which I just gave you a few pieces of, I was like, once again, sitting there one day going, oh, what's the point? I can't change the world. But then I started to think, well, our goal should never be to change the world. No one can change the world, but we can change our world. So my collection's called the Change Your World collection. So you walk past someone, it says, what are you grateful for? They might not even say something to you, but subconsciously they think, oh, I'm grateful for this, or be kind to your mind. It's that little subconscious. So sure, we might not be able to change the world, but with my merch, hopefully someone walks past and like the one you're looking at me in now, the little good in the mind, it's like, oh, I should have good in my mind. Like these little subtle things, they're not going to change the world, but it can change your world, which can make you go to bed feeling like you're the victor of the day. You've actually had that impact on your community, which, is so important.
Yeah, and it's important to realize that, as you said, none of us can really change the world, right? And for me, I always say to people, when people, will write to me these kind messages like, you changed my life, or this changed my life, and I always say, you changed your life.
By listening to what I say,
like I'm just a spark. That's all I will ever be in anyone's reality except my own. And in anyone's story, I'm simply a catalyst. And you can choose to be catalyzed by the information you're receiving, or you could choose to stay the same. And when we put the burden of responsibility to change others on ourselves or to change the world, we will always feel like we're failing. But if we just put the responsibility on ourselves to say, I just want to be a spark. That's it. Spark someone's dream, spark someone's thoughts, spark the fact that you can be kind to yourself, change your world. And those kind of things, I think, should be the focus. To say, will I change the world? Will I change one life? Will I change 1 million lives? I don't know. But will I be a spark that changes the way someone thinks? That I know I'll do,
Wow. I needed to hear that just then. That was very succinctly put. I love that. It's so, we have such similarities, I think, in the way we think and see the world, which is just so beautiful. And one thing that we do have in common, I'd like to say, hopefully from myself, and I know from you as well, is kindness. And that's, you spoke about kindness of humankind, yeah?
Yes, I did.
So let's talk about kindness and what kindness means to you.
Oh man, this is one of my favorite topics. So as one of the co-CEOs of Aime, what we're really doing is we're targeting projects that are meaningful to also spark change in the world. And my key project is kindness economics. And what I love about kindness economics, and that's why I was so fascinated by you speaking about it too, is the fact that I feel like kindness is something that people take so for granted,
Mm.
because it's this thing that we kind of put in a candy floss coating, right? We're like, oh, be kind, you
Mm.
know? But what does it mean? What's the action of kindness? How do we feel when people are kind to us? How do we feel when we're kind to others? And to me, really, my mission at the moment is to make people realize that when you put people at the center of any organization, system, economic structure, that's when life changes. And that's what kindness is. It's saying to people, I see you, I hear you, I value you. That's what kindness is. It's an action, it's not passive. You're not just vibrating kindness necessarily. But when we realize that kindness is one of the things that I believe will save humanity. Kindness, I believe, is going to save the planet, because when you are a kind human being, you are walking a very different vibration to people who are mean spirited. When we have this as a quantifiable value in society and people know the metrics of it, I think that people will realize, I want a kind home, I want a kind working environment. And when we start with those small things, guess what? We're going to litter less. We're going to take care of our environment. We're not going to take more than we need. We're not going to be over consuming everything. You'll be like, hey, I said I wanted to make $10 million. Why am I rushing for 100? What do I need $100 million for? Because the world is currently being governed by greed. You just want more, 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 more. Excessiveness, right? You were speaking about the consumption, and we just want to consume, consume, consume. And kindness says, I don't need to consume more than what I need. And that's what it is, you know? And I actually want to hear your take on kindness.
Yeah, I'd love to share it because it very well lines up with exactly what you're saying once again. So I break kindness when I speak about it in my keynotes into 3 categories: being kind to yourself, being kind to others, and being kind to the environment. The way I speak about being kind to yourself, there's obviously millions of things that we can do, from all different self-development stuff, from meditation, gratitude. There's so many things, but the one I touch on firstly is our breath. Being kind to ourselves is being conscious of our breath. Are we breathing through our nose, or are we breathing through our mouth? I don't know how much research you've done into your breath, but breathing through our nose is far better for us physiologically. Are we breathing into our chest, or are we breathing to our body? This is a simple act of kindness that we can do for ourselves, which is free. Am I breathing through my nose to my belly, or through my mouth to my chest? That's being kinder to yourself by just breathing in a way that's easier, that's better for us. So that's the first one. Being kind to others is just obviously so important. And it's funny, kindness is now so, like, there's so much great data out there that shows that kinder people are happier people, yet we're not getting forced this at school because obviously no one's making money from it. So I encourage people, and it's funny, like when we're kind to somebody, not only does it make the person we're kind to feel good, but it makes us feel good. It's releasing serotonin and oxytocin in our own brain. So it's funny, when we're kind to someone, I think it's something like 70% of us, when somebody offers us a gift, a compliment, we go, oh, no, and try and block it. We feel undeserving. But that's blocking a chance for somebody to be kind. So the more that we can open this conversation of when somebody does something kind to you, as hard as it is, 70% of us feel this way, all you got to say is thank you. How do we learn to accept kindness more? Because then it allows people to give more kindness. So that's number 2. And number 3 is being kind to the environment. And I tell this story because I think you'll like this. Kindness as a value is something more than something in your head. It's something that you embody. And I used to pick up a bit of rubbish on the beach. I'd throw it in the bin, look around. Did anyone see me do it? Kind of embarrassing, but that's just kind of how I was. I didn't live by values when I was younger. I was ego driven. Am I looking good? And now I know being kind to the environment, throwing rubbish in the bin, I know it's releasing happiness chemicals in my brain now, because being kind to the environment truly matters to me. I don't care if anyone sees me do it. I throw rubbish in the bin. It makes me feel good. So that's what kindness means to me, is knowing that it's more than just, like you said before, this platitude of kindness. Is like, how do we embody kindness? Do we do it because it looks good, or do we because it feels good? And that's where I'm trying to find my kindness now, is not just doing it because it makes someone else feel good, doing it because we know now the science shows it makes us feel good by doing more kind things. But yeah, hopefully that kind of gives you a good little 3-prong approach that I quantify kindness in for myself.
Oh, I love it. And you said 2 things that I just want to point out that I think are so powerful. The first one is how difficult it is for us to receive. And I think someone actually helped me change my own paradigm around it. And they said, when you decline a good offering from someone, whether that be a compliment, a gift, whatever it is, what you're really doing is you are terminating that person's ability to gift you. So you are depriving that human being of being able to
Feel good by giving.
feel good, have that energy. And so you're not only being unkind to them, you're being unkind to yourself too. So no one wins in that situation. And I know as women especially, we experience this where people will compliment us and we have a justification for the compliment. It's like, oh, you look great. Oh, I got this at the garbage bin on the side of the street. And all of a sudden you're in a soliloquy about the dress. I mean, and I think just learning to say thank you and keep quiet.
It's hard,
Thank
but
you.
we have to get better at it.
Right? And it's that, for me, I believe in feminine, masculine energy, and both of them are beautiful within all of us. And feminine energy is receptive energy. But in order to be in feminine energy, you need to feel safe. And I think so many of us are in our masculine energy, which is the action, get, do, blah, blah, blah. And so when we don't feel, when we can't receive kindness or anything, I genuinely believe it's because we're feeling unsafe in our own bodies. And that's what I love about your first point about gift yourself, like that breathing. Are you kind to you? Are you treating yourself well? Are you putting good things into your body? Like I know you've been alcohol free, which I think is amazing. And that's an act of kindness. When I think of it, I'm like, yeah, is alcohol doing great things in my body? No.
Exactly.
It really isn't. And it's an unkind action to myself. And other people would look at it and say, but having a glass of wine with someone I love is kind to me.
Exactly.
So it's definitely not a judgment. It's just saying like consciousness is the most important thing, I think, in kindness.
Yeah, just an awareness. That might have been my favorite in like 105 episodes. My favorite little 10-minute segment, I think, getting to talk to someone else who gets off on kindness. It's amazing. But I want to go to my last little segment with you, and that's Aime. Do you want to explain what Aime is, I guess, to the listeners? I know what it is, obviously, but if you want to explain what Aime is, how you become involved with them, and your role with them and where you see that going moving forward.
Absolutely. Another conversation I love. So Aime is, we started off as a mentoring institution that helped Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders kids get their mentors and get them into college, university. And now Aime has really expanded. We're now a research lab that is focused on creating sustainable solutions to some of the world's largest issues. And how we're doing that is we're creating systematic levers. So we've got a lever of peace. We've got environmental one, we've got kindness. So there's so many of those that we're working on. And what we're doing is we're really launching into research projects and partnering with reputable organizations to carry the research with us. And what we really want to do, and this is my aim and objective at Aime, because I run the kindness initiative, is really to get this measured to such a degree that the World Economic Forum cannot ignore it. The world at large, the United Nations can't ignore it. Because if we gather all this data that you were talking about and we really put it into spaces, so our case studies are festivals like Humankind, that was one of our big case studies. We've got Sunrise Festival. I'm about to go to Europe to team up with more festivals. So we're doing them around the world.
You're on Parklife in Manchester in June. I don't know. I'm going to be there watching fish up.
Thank you for the hookup.
Let me know if you want to come.
I want to come.
In June. Let me know.
I'm doing all of this, Cooper. I'm taking you up, and we've got photographic and video evidence.
Let's do it. I got it. But I'd love to have you there.
That would be amazing. But really, what we do in these festivals is not only are we rewarding people for kindness, because we have a VIKP program, which is a very important kind person.
I love that.
And what I love about that, it really says to humanity, have we gotten so far as human beings that the only value of a man, a human being, a person is how much they make? Do we not value the person who takes care of 10 kids that aren't their own? Do we not value the woman who has to carry water to a village? Do we not value the person who's babysitting for free because they know someone's going through things? And the VIKP program is saying, very important kind people are VIPs. And we are going to measure this consistently over the next 10 years because Aime, for those people who don't know, we have an intentional death date, which means that the organization is going to cease to exist in 10 years and we're going to open source everything we've learned. And what I love about this is that it eliminates greed. We're working towards an end. Yeah. And I think the beauty of that is I believe in a lot of Stoic philosophy, memento mori, memento vivere, which is remember you're going to die. So remember to live. And so this is one of the big reasons I came on board with Aime. But real reason I came on board with Aime is because of Jack Manning Bancroft, the founder of Aime. I met him about 4 or 5 years ago in South Africa, and he asked the mutual acquaintance of ours if he could do an interview with me. And I so strongly believe in intuition because I just flown in from a long haul flight from New York. And the last thing I wanted to do was an interview, but my soul just said go. I went, I met Jack and the team at the time, and they interviewed me. A few weeks later, he asked if he could use my interview as a mentorship program. I said, sure. And we just kind of kept in touch. And I think there's always been so much mutual respect there. I've always respected what Jack has done. I've respected the fact that he's gone to the beat of his own drum in order to affect change and be a cog in the wheel of change. And so when I was taking a sabbatical last year, I just contacted him and I was like, we've wanted to work together for so long. What's good? What's up? And that's how we ended up really getting me on board and me doing the work we do.
Wow. I'm excited to see the work that you continue to do with them and
thank you.
The future of the work. Yeah, just that you do getting to share your story, inspire people to learn to forgive, to learn what kindness is, and just to learn to be a good human. You've been an absolutely perfect guest for the Good Human Factory podcast. I'll have to chat to you off air, but it'd be great to have you as an ambassador. My ambassador program doesn't involve doing anything other than your name being on the website that I see you as a good human and giving you merch because, yeah.
I am now the ambassador.
You're the best. My first South African ambassador.
Woo!
But yeah, it's been incredible sharing your story. I can't thank you enough for your time, for your friendship although we've only met a few times, I feel like we're probably pretty close friends just from, you have those connections with people where you know you're on a similar level and you both want something out of the world that is a bit different to maybe the status quo, who are just trying to survive, which is a scary thing nowadays. I feel like we're lucky we're in a place where we can really try and thrive and help other people thrive, which is what I think you're really doing. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. I do finish every Good Humans podcast with the same question, and I'm very excited to hear your answer to this. So the last question is, what does being a good human mean to Candice Mama?
Oh my goodness. Before I even answer that, I just want to just say how honored I am to be on your platform. I have so much respect for the work you do in every arena. How you show up for the world, I think, is your greatest gift. And just getting to talk to you, this was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. You're so thoughtful. You really invested. And I think it speaks to your character as a human being. From the time we've met, you're just such a good human.
Minus the fact that I didn't do any research, but I'm just very curious.
You know what? I think that's
Once
brilliant.
You do enough interviews, you can just talk where
That's
you need
the
to
best
talk.
part, because we just got to lean on our friendship, to lean on the conversation, and I think it went amazing. And so it leads me to, what is a good human? I think a good human is someone who wakes up every day and they just have a sense of duty to themselves and a sense of duty to those around them, to just show up in the best way, to be kind, to do good and not harm. I think all of us are going to disappoint someone at some point in our lives. So the aim is never to be perfect, but the aim is to be good. It's to be kind. It's to be better than you were yesterday. And also the biggest part about being a good human is being a good human being to yourself, showing up for you. Because I know this is such an overused saying, but you cannot give what you do not have. So if you are not good to you, it's going to seep out. We are going to know it. You can try and put on all the good acts in the world and be a philanthropist and throw money at things, but we feel it. We feel authentic spirits when we meet them. And if you are not taking care of your soul, if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not looking at yourself in the mirror and going, you know, I am not too bad. I'm doing quite good, okay? If you are not your biggest cheerleader, and that's work, that's effort, that's time, but it's work worth doing, because the more you invest in yourself, the better of a human being you are to everyone around you and to all of us who get to experience you. So essentially for me, that is what being a good human is.
I absolutely love that. Isn't that funny? Pride gets like quite a bad name, but I think pride's an important trait to have if it's used right. But yeah, thank you so much for everything. I want to give you a hug. Thank you.
Let's hug it out. Thank you.
Oh, you're the best.
You're the best. This was amazing.
Let me finish quickly. If anyone wants to find you on socials, it will all be in the show notes, but anything you've got coming up, anything you want to plug right now, now's your little chance so people can get in contact or find the work that you do.
Thank you. So the first place I want everyone to go to as soon as they leave the podcast is aimementoring.com. Go to Aime Mentoring, just see what we are doing over there. I think so many people we're the best kept secret, I always say. And that's because Jack does not subscribe to social media. So the organization's not on any social media platform. So go ahead, aimementoring.com. On a personal level, if you want to find me, it is Candice, CANDICE_Mama, MAMA. That's on every other platform, literally every platform. And yes, that's really my surname.
That's what I was to start before we started recording. Mama, great surname.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure for coming on Good Humans Podcast.
Oh, what an honor, Cooper. Thank you.
Amazing.